Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandra Deschamps-Sonsino, and I'm the initiator of the Low Carbon Design Institute. We're at our last talk and our last keynote of today. We've had two other keynotes. And this is last but absolutely not least, I'm so pleased to welcome Michelle Thorne to our virtual residency. Michelle is a dear friend of mine for many years now, but most importantly is interested in climate justice and a fossil-free internet. She is a senior program officer at the Mozilla Foundation. She leads a PhD program on open design of trust things, Open Dot, and research initiatives in Mozilla sustainability programs. She publishes Branch, which is an online magazine written for and by people who dream about a sustainable internet. It has just won a Ars Electronica Prix, I believe in a kind of publishing category, but you can tell us more about that in a second. She's the advisor to the Green Web Foundation and the Billion Seconds Institute. She also co-founded a sustainable fashion label, Zephyr Berlin, which I'm actually incidentally wearing today. Michelle, so welcome.
Oh, what a pleasure to be here, and so cool to get to experience this residency, even if it's just at this tail end. I'm going to share my screen because I feel like in Zoom land, it's always helpful to have these different slides. So pull those up. Can you all see these all right? Okay, beautiful. Well, yeah, it's a pleasure to talk. Thank you, Alex, for the nice intro. I think we should just dive right in, could make the most of our time together. But yeah, what I'm really interested to talk to you all today about is, I called it Solarpunk Dreams and Other Ways of Commoning. And we'll get into maybe some of these ideas if you're not so familiar with Solarpunk, but it's basically a way to kind of jam and share ideas with each other around the intersection of sustainable technology, digital rights, and climate justice. So yeah, maybe it's sometimes helpful to know a little bit where people are coming from. I guess philosophically, I'm coming from the free and open movement. I've been, really inspired by the move for, open knowledge, open data, free culture, and now the kind of new critiques of that stuff, as well as feminism, and more recently, Solarpunk. And a little warning, if you are able, we're going to do a little breakout exercise a little bit later. So if you're able to grab a piece of paper and something to write with, like it can really be, a scrap piece of paper and pencil. It does not have to be anything fancy, but there'll just be a chance to do some sketching. So if you need a minute, while I'm going on, you can also be grabbing a paper and a pen. And if you also don't have that, you can also use whatever, device, whatever you've got. And I thought for just a little bit of how we could break this down, this next hour we've got together is do a super brief opening circle. I know you all know each other, but I thought maybe it was a nice way to check in. And I want to talk a little bit about divesting from big tech and about Solarpunk, and then have this kind of draw jam session together with you about some irresistible futures, and then kind of close with a where from here. So with no further ado, be warned, you're going to be asked to unmute yourself. And I'd love to hear just a quick go around your name, one thing you've learned from this residency, brevity is king with your one thing, and an emoji to describe how you feel about the future. Does that sound like an okay prompt for everyone?
I'm gonna kind of point to people just in order that they appear on my chat. So Elvia first.
So my name is Elvia. One thing that I learned, but the thing that has stuck with me from this residency is commit. Do it, just commit to something. And an emoji. So I'm going to share it on the chat, and you can go to the next person.
Joe is next on my list.
Hi, my name's Joe People. This residency has been very in-depth and multifaceted. And just today, I'm sort of learning that, like, I'm probably just going to be like, I'm going to be asking like questions, whereas what I thought I'd be doing was like giving answers, and I'm just going to be like, I'm going to try and be listening more and reaching out and with stuff. And yeah, how's that?
That's great. You get to pick an emoji and put it in the chat, maybe.
Okay, I'm going to try and do that on my phone because I'm in the Barbican with these guys.
Sounds good.
And I don't know how to do that, so I'm gonna. You might give me a little moment. I'll put it in the chat.
No,
I'm gonna.
we'll move on to the next person who is literally physically standing right next to you, Lucy.
Kelsey
I'm
dropped
not
in and- oh, there you
actually.
go.
Can you hear me? I'm trying to get into the Barbican.
Okay, never mind. We'll I can
it's
skip
cool.
over you. I can
It's
skip
cool.
over you. Okay, go ahead.
So I'm Lucy. I think the one thing I've learned, I guess one word is like multitudes, whatever that means. And then you can see my emoji in the chat.
Thanks, Lucy. Moving on to Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie. One thing I've learned about the residency is I think we have to say fuck off to convenience. And an emoji that I feel about the future, I was just going to paste it in the chat as well, which is one of my favorite Japanese emojis. These are the best ones. And it's the table flipping. Let's just chuck it up into the air.
Thank
Yes.
you. Next up, Carl.
How's my audio?
Good.
It's okay. Yeah, so I'm outdoors, but I'm not in the Barbican. So one thing I've learned is that you have to be in London to make. No, I'm joking. Now, one thing I've learned about this residency is I think the power of language and framing. I think that's been the thing that's come to the fore the most. And an emoji, maybe I'd squash like a ghost and a poo together, and that'd be my. If you can do one of them.
What you painted a picture.
Next up, Ruth.
Hello. So I think one thing I've learned from residency, or one thing that I'm thinking about, I don't know if it's just because it was the talk before, was about like acknowledging where power is held in design. So I think that's something that I hadn't really been thinking about in my work, but it's something that I'm going to be thinking about going forward. And an emoji, I think maybe the solidarity one. I'll see if I can put that in the chat.
Thanks. Moving on to Shirley.
Hi, I would say that redefining is what I've learned from the residency, and reshaping. And I'll stick my emoji in the chat.
Priya.
Sorry, can you hear me? Brilliant. Hi, I'm Priya. What I'm learning from this residency, I was just joking earlier, Alec, this feels like the Stanford prison experiment. You probably selected us and you made us give us all this amazing information, and every day it's like a roller coaster, and I love it. It's in a good way. It's a good Stanford prison experiment.
It's not a prison. It's not a prison.
Well, it's a bit like, I always been intrigued by Stockholm syndrome and all these things, you know, so so when you're talking about climate stuff, it's nice that you can actually share your anxiety as well as your hopes with a bunch of people and be quite open in your vulnerability. So that's what I found really lovely about this, is one can just be really honest with each other. And I think my so Dan and I were just having this conversation about creating a metal band group called Post Pandemic. So in the spirit of post pandemic and heavy metal, my emoji is going to be this. Let me try and find it.
I'll let you do that and put Emma on the spot.
Yes.
Hang on, I'm coming. Hey up. Oh, we don't like one thing questions, number one. So I feel like after Fraser's chat today, his talk, I feel much more confident, I think, around the way you frame your lived experience and who you are to make sense of why you feel blurty. So some of that class stuff. And the safe space, I'm going to echo what Priya said, that everybody's got such interesting perspectives, and the way it's been convened has been wonderful to be able to be completely honest and vulnerable. And that's an amazing space to be in. I don't know about emojis. I don't believe in them.
Okay, it says the woman who does play for a living. I'm gonna put Dana on the spot.
Okay, I'm just unmuting myself. Okay, so surprisingly, I'm also at the Barbican with this bunch. I guess the first thing I learned is how amazing spontaneity is and like immediate connection, which is so nice to be able to do this with people you've met like 2 weeks ago. And the other thing I've learned is that it's really amazing to have a safe space to share all of these climate concerns and feel like feel like you're not an outcast when you're voicing them, and that you're not the only person who wants to burn everything down. And then we can get together and kind of work on it. And I guess my emoji is fire.
We're done, Michelle.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you all for sharing that. I really feel like it's a good glimpse into what you're learning and how you're feeling. So thank you. Yeah, thank you. And well, I thought this was actually, people touched on this a lot in what you were saying, but I really found that throughout this, I'm going to share quotes that have just been resonating with me in the last months and weeks. And this one from the political organizer, Grace Lee Boggs, who talks about we have to transform ourselves to transform the world. And that really sounds also like some of the learnings that you all have. And it echoes also for me the sense of, for a long time, I've just been into I'll call it the tech part of like making tech better, blah, blah, blah. And only recently been like, well, shit, the planet's on fire. And what am I doing? Like, how did my interest in tech and also making tech better or not making tech, step up to that responsibility around the climate. So I wanted to share a little bit of some of like how I've been thinking about those issues, and other people have been thinking about those issues, and some practical things that have been coming out as well, and maybe some provocations. So yeah, this will not come as a surprise to you, but I find that it's really helpful to anchor these conversations about technology with an acknowledgement that technology is political. It's made by humans, used by humans, but also inside systems. And the more we can talk and see and make visible and change those systems, the better. So I think it's always really important to ground whatever we talk about in this acknowledgement that technology is political. And also in an acknowledgement that technology is contributing to the climate crisis. So there's a kind of range of estimates actually about how much does the internet contribute to the world's carbon emissions. 2% is actually kind of a conservative estimate. And so I think this is another thing to be aware of. There's a really strong narrative being pushed a lot by tech companies and some politicians that technology will save us. It's going to remove carbon so fast, it's going to make everything super efficient. And while there's of course things that technology will do to help us decarbonize, we also have to account for its emissions. And we also have to think about the social costs. There's many more social costs, not just environmental, on the use of tech. And so I think this is also another really important thing to ground our thinking in. And so I would cite my buddy, Chris Adams, who was also here and I think gave a talk a few days ago. And he has this great comment when he says, we talk about energy when we should be talking about power. And this is something, again, really prevalent in the tech sectors. Everyone's talking about, speeding up the transition, running everything on renewables. And while that's awesome, even if we transfer the existing internet to renewables today, we would still be living in an extractive neoliberal society and with neoliberal extractive technologies. So we have to be talking about power when we talk about, energy and the climate and these other issues. So I would like to just ground this also in some other research. So this slide comes from Mozilla's Internet Health Report, and it's talking about the 10 largest companies in the world by market capitalization. They're either oil companies, but actually now way outpacing oil companies in general are the tech companies. And that kind of wealth has only increased throughout the pandemic. So we have to be talking about the high concentration of wealth into a few companies when we talk about who owns or who has power on the internet. And much of this is also quite invisible. You know, as a user of technology, you're usually only talking about some limited device and interface experience with it. But the tentacles of these organizations are huge. All the shell companies they have are huge. All the labor that they rely on are huge. That's not a surprise to you all here. But I wanted to also quote the researcher and activist Vladan Joler, who talks about we have to make that true cost of technology more visible. And I think this is something that we can think about with design practices, ways to make those true costs both visible as a first step. So I'll just start with this visibility thing and share a project he did called Anatomy of an AI System. This is like the world's craziest map. I'll drop in the link later if you want to like check it out and closer. It's in the V&A in their permanent collection now, but it's basically the whole true cost, let's say, of making an Amazon Alexa from the mining to the smelting to the production of the device to the training of the data to the content moderation, all the way to the recycling and e-waste side of it. And on the far left side, he has breaks down the wages of the different people in this project. And I think this is, one of the most wild attempts, but I think really amazing to try to show, if you just see an Amazon Alexa, you just see this whatever shiny casing. And we need to make visible and more understand these extractions and systems that are going on behind it. So I definitely can shout out this Anatomy of AI. And I also want to link this to responsibility. And so Alan Gunn, who runs an amazing group called Aspiration, is talking about trying to link data responsibility, which means like being frugal with your data, being responsible for the data that's collected, which might mean not collecting data to begin with, and linking that to a sense of climate responsibility. And so, some examples of this, there's quite a few, but a fresh one that I wanted to share is this Solar Protocol project by Tiga Brain and others. And she's talking about how can you also be responsible for the data that you're using for your internet connection. And so she has this kind of experimental project where she has a community of server stewards who are tending to servers that are you can use those servers when they're in sunlight, and when it's nighttime, those servers are offline. And so this is kind of reconnecting to the natural world and to the resources of the natural world, and also stewarding of community technology and like the sense of responsibility that also comes with building and maintaining these systems. Oh yeah, thank you for dropping in the link, Alex, the Solar Protocol. And lastly, in kind of this section, which is about like technology is political, I wanted to uplift Mary Robinson, who was the former president of Ireland and a kind of advocate of climate justice. And she talks a lot, you've also mentioned in earlier the importance of narratives. And she talks about, okay, we have to look at the narrative of climate justice, which is not about greenhouse gases and melting ice caps, which are important, but actually centering it on a civil rights movement with people of communities that are most vulnerable at its heart. And I think that this kind of framing is really important also when we talk about technology. We need it and its environmental impact. Often that's a little bit disconnected, but I feel like this framing by Mary Robinson really helps me remember, okay, we need to be centering these issues in a civil rights context with people that are impacted at the heart. So that's my little spiel. Oh, this is just a little last example of kind of a cool practical project trying to do that. There's a campaign called Make Amazon Pay, which was connecting employees across Amazon, from delivery workers to warehouse workers to people in the management, who were saying, globally across the world, making demands that were linking better better practices, labor practices, better environmental practices, and more accountability in the organization. And I think this is a sign of the kind of political work to come, that we need to be linking these issues and working also with workers inside these systems as well to push the corporations to change. So that, yeah, was a really, Make Amazon Pay was a really cool project. Yeah, thank you for the links. So as a little pause, that was a bit of a big setup to talk about tech as political, but there's a great book by Kim Stanley Robinson called Ministry for the Future. And in it, there's this great exchange where one guy who's basically been traumatized by climate impacts already is like, you're not doing enough. And then this woman who's in charge of like a big climate response is like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, we're doing everything we can think of. And she's like, it's still not working. It's not enough. And so I think this and this kind of exchange around, we're doing everything we can think of. And the fact is that emissions are still rising and the climate impacts are being felt more and more. It's not enough. So like, what are we going to do about it individually and collectively? And that's where imagination comes in, and Solarpunk. So I don't know if people are already familiar with Solarpunk. It's still new to me, but I'm really inspired by it. It's a kind of, I don't know, movement, aesthetic collectives who are saying we're reclaiming optimism because it's been taken away from us, and we need optimism. And we're not naive, but we need hope. And so Solarpunk is kind of a hopeful yet aware movement, I would call it that. And maybe one place I would shout out, where if you're interested in learning more about them, they have a really nice manifesto that came out a few months ago. And these are just some of the things that are in their manifesto. And they talk a lot about how it's about not just where we get to, but like how we get there. The emphasis on process is just as important as the goal. Also the importance of like diversity of tactics, and recognizing also that science fiction, and I would also say design, can be forms of activism, and that we need these sites of activism and imagination as part of making change. And then lastly, just this kind of emphasis on environmental sustainability linked with justice. These are not separate things. We can't be sustainable without thinking about justice issues. So definitely check out the Solarpunks. There's some really great resources online. People have curated different artworks and essays and things like that. And the manifesto, I think, is really a great starting point if you're interested in this framing. And so when I came across the Solarpunks, I was like, yes, we got to imagine, we got to explore, we got to build. And so I just wanted to share a little bit of one project, and then that was an attempt to be like a Solarpunk response to these topics. But then I want to invite you all to do a little bit of sketching and drawing on your, by yourself or in a little group. But yeah, taking up that kind of Solarpunk call, I collaborated with some people to make this thing called the Museum of the Fossilized Internet. And the idea is that thinking about the carbon footprint of the internet, it's so big that we had to make it really small. So we made a miniature museum. This museum is like 1 meter by 1 meter and filled with tiny little handcrafted objects. And it's a museum from the future. So actually I invite you to be with me in the year 2050, where we're looking back on the internet of today and kind of gasping at the horrors of coal and oil fueled internet. And we're kind of exploring what were the major polluters of this past time. And so I'll just do like showcase like a few of the objects just to give you a sense of them. This is a little zoom in of the museum. And for example, we put a Bitcoin mining rig in there. I think now it's very well known that how Bitcoin is I think this stat is much more outdated, but Bitcoin has been one of the blessings and a curse to talk about these issues, because it's become now really, really, really clear the energy demands we have when we use things like proof of work cryptocurrencies. So here's our little mining rig. We also made little tiny spam cans And we talked about the carbon cost of spam and how this is something that nobody wants or needs or likes. Yet, of course, all these invisible automated systems are just generating all sorts of emissions. And so we have to maybe think about the health of the internet and also connected to like the kinds of emissions that are coming from them. We also made an homage to the artist Joanna Moll. She did an amazing project talking about what is the carbon cost of buying Jeff Bezos's book autobiography on Amazon. And so she went to Amazon.com, she ordered the book, and then she just counted how many scripts were loaded, how many lines of code were required to just order a single book on Amazon.com. And it turns out that if you printed the code it takes to order a book on Amazon, it would be worth like 20 volumes. And it's just kind of mind-boggling that even this like very, quote, simple seeming transaction loads up so many extra resources. And a lot of that is linked to things that are not actually beneficial to us as the users of those systems, and rather that computation is kind of outsourced or offloaded onto us. So this was a little homage to that, Joanna Moll's project. And then this one was looking at ads and the fact that about 10% of the internet's carbon footprint could be attributed to ads. Again, something that often happens automatically without our consent, and the kind of real-time auctioning for ad space, and then all the ad tech tracking that goes on really reduces like the performance of the web and more, let alone like thinking about its like carbon footprint. And then this was the last one to just shout out, was talking about the role of streaming. And definitely in the pandemic, we have spent more time looking at things like Netflix and all that. But this example was talking about Despacito, which has been viewed like 5 billion times on YouTube, which required the energy equivalent of 850,000 barrels of oil. So I think this project was really nice to kind of link what we're doing virtually with the real resources that are being used in the world. So I won't do any more of these, but if you want to check out more of these little tiny objects in this little tiny museum, then this is the link to do that. And this was an attempt to try to wrap our minds around something that was so big and complex, but to try to make it a little bit accessible and fun. So with that, I have this kind of, I don't know, personal motivation around thinking about the sustainable, equitable digital future, and wondering like, how are we going to do it? So as inspiration, I wanted to bring in this quote from the Black feminist Toni Cade Bambara, who talks about make the revolution irresistible. And so this idea of irresistibility as an important part of drawing people into change. And so maybe we could, for a few minutes, imagine some irresistible futures together. So this is where your pen and paper will be handy. So what I'm going to invite you to do in a moment is we're going to imagine we're in the lobby of this Museum of the Fossilized Internet. And in the lobby of this museum, it's kind of telling the story about how we got to this decarbonized digital future. And it's going to have other artifacts of like the struggle and the things that were made and the policies that were passed and all the things that kind of helped us get actually to this decarbonized 2050 vision. And so the invitation for you all is like, if you can reflect on what a sustainable and just internet means to you, and like what would need to happen to make that a reality, and what artifacts or stories would help future visitors understand what had to change or what did change. So it's more just a prompt to kind of, think about what steps we might need to get to this, sustainable digital future. And so, Alex, I might ask your help if we want to. I think it's like sometimes people want to draw and sketch solo, which is cool, and also if you want to do it in like a small group. But maybe we just give ourselves like 5 or so minutes just to kind of have a think a little bit. I'll keep this up or paste it in the chat for everyone to think a little bit about what this means to you and what yeah, let's see if we can draw something that helped us get to this more sustainable, just internet.
Yeah, I'm gonna, I might put people in groups just so that the ones who are physically together in the Barbican right now can work together as a group. And those who are not anywhere or who are away from the Barbican can work together too. So I'm gonna just shove you into tiny rooms together for the next 10 minutes. And even if you wanna co-work this or whatever you wanna do, I think it's at least nice to be in a tiny group with other people and just to exchange. And maybe come back, or I'll close those breakout rooms at what, 1:45, 10:45? Something like that.
Yeah, maybe just if we want to have time for Q&A, we might have to maybe do a shorter drawing round. But
Fine.
I will
And
leave.
I mean, yeah, if you, yeah, I'll just make sure.
do like
that-
5 or 7 minutes maybe of drawing.
Yeah.
Works for y'all.
Okay, I've just created some tiny rooms. Tiny,
tiny rooms.
Tiny.
Cool. See you all in a tiny room. Hello.
Hi, shall I, I'll close all rooms now.
Yeah, let's do that. I know it was super fast, but sometimes it's nice to do something quickly.
Oh, good. Hopefully, those who are in the Barbican can also keep an eye on their thing.
I was with Shirley and Julie and they were fast. They made quick sketch. They were like, we got some ideas.
Of course, of course. I expect nothing less.
Beautiful. There are more people. Thank you all for the rapid round of sketching. Of course, deep ideas require deep and long thinking, but then it's also sometimes nice to do quick sketches. I would invite people. We don't have to do everyone if you don't want to share, but maybe even a few people could just do a quick share of what you sketched, or at least some of the ideas that resonated with you.
We have 3 groups,
Oh.
so perhaps just the group that Carl was in, perhaps. Elvia, Emma.
So I'll have a go in, Emma, Carl, please add. So we talked about the tray internet. So it's something that has been discussed. I think Emma dreamt it, Priya mentioned it. So this notion of the internet coming from the trees. And then we also talked about will there be internet in 2050? And then from that we went to, well, there might not be internet as we know it. So, you know, if you get rid of all the bad things, you know, very simplistically, it's transformed into something else completely. And Emma, you were also mentioning, you know, kind of her background is irresistible, and that activity as being irresistible. And from that, we went to, you know, this transformation could be, you know, about making the internet very much more connected to the real space and the concrete dimensions. So
Awesome,
Emma
thank you.
and Carl, feel free to add if I left anything out.
We've got Priya and company, I'm just going to call it.
Sorry, Alex. I feel like I'm in school again. You know, the mischievous one being pulled out. So this is our sketch. It's the casino style vending machine. It's sponsored by Saudi Aramco. Lucy had this great idea where it literally gives you money and basically takes your personal data, and you're on Facebook and you basically get money for browsing and seeing all these ads. So that's our vending machine, yeah. But it's the whole internet is basically like, probably we have to figure out a way to who sponsors that, right? You spoke about open source. You want to talk about no, okay. Dana doesn't want to talk about it. It's quite a secret project, apparently.
Awesome, beautiful metaphor with the vending machine, and then also the hands just unable to resist it. For sure.
And then finally your group, Michelle.
I'll look to Julie and Shirley maybe to share. Oh, with color now, wow.
We talked about, I suppose Julie's got a separate drawing, she should show hers as well, but we talked about what if the internet was only available for a limited time every day. So every country got a time zone from noon for an hour, and that's when all the internet could happen in that country.
Yeah, mine is this is the the sun sets on the internet and everything starts fading out and you have to wait for the sun to rise, and then you get all the data starts flooding back in again. So you have a sense of structure, like we have a structure to our days. The internet gives us some kind of structure over when it's peak time for viewing and when it's not, and then it, you know, time to have complete time out.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing. I really like even just the ideas that were hinted at. And I know it's like zero time to actually get into stuff, but it's fun to see where that came out too. I'm just going to bring us home on this just last little few slides, and then I know we still have a few moments to wrap up, but I just wanted to end with a thank you and a where from here. So one thing that's really helped me is this realization, okay, the climate crisis is not like the separate issue. It's a whole era. It touches everything, everyone, every organism. So thinking about it in this terms of this era has been really helpful. And I wanted to give a shout out to another really, you all might probably have already come across this, but the book Design Justice, I think has really also helped me think about facilitation practices, participatory practices, but using this kind of justice lens and using the act of design to help get us towards a more just world. And I'd also like to shout out Climate Action Tech. I think Chris Adams, who's on the call already, has talked about them, but that's a really great community if you're really interested in looking particularly at this intersection of tech and climate. It's a really great kind of learning community. And from that community, we did this magazine. We just launched the new issue today, so definitely check it out. It's called Branch Magazine, and put the link in the chat. And it's definitely and Alex contributed a great article in the last issue about the Low Carbon Design Institute before you all convened. And it's, I think, a really nice way of looking at these different practices and what are different practices bringing to this question of a sustainable internet. And one of the things we experimented with, which I appreciated, some of the ideas were kind of resonating here too, was just carbon aware design. So rather than saying like it's all or nothing all the time, what are the ways we could be designing so that we're responsive to what resources are maybe currently available? So on the website, we have this kind of grid intensity thing that responds to the actual, like the kind of electricity mix you have right now. And I think these are the kinds of things design also can help us think through. So we have more visibility into what's going into our systems, both resources and people and impacts, and then make things that are a little bit more adaptable and richer than just, you know, on or off. And the last kind of closing inspirations, I guess, I couldn't find a good example of craftivism, but you probably have also come across this idea of there's a lot of ways to make change, and they don't always involve like having a big sign and being on the streets, but there are ways of making that also can shake things up. And so I think that's a really exciting thing when I think about the practice of design, is how can through the act of making we change things. And yeah, let's make this revolution and make it irresistible. And it's been a total pleasure to dream and build and think and talk with you all. And yeah, thanks. And maybe we can have a little closing chat before you all conclude your amazing residency.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for taking the time. I want you to talk to us a little bit about, I guess, some of your own practices and ways in which you let the things that you read, the things that you kind of encounter, how you let them be part of your work, because I do think that some of us have been having discussions about how we keep a hold of knowledge that passes through our hands, links that come and go. How do you do it, and how do you do it in your work every day?
Oh man, it feels like sand through your fingers sometimes, right? Like there's, but I do think this idea of like learning in a group is really awesome, or at least you have like people that you're learning and discussing and riffing off ideas with, even if it's just for a time-bounded thing. That's also definitely how I've liked to learn. And then I always try to write it up, like as like I at different moments in my life tried to use, you know, blogging or different open practices to be like, this is what I learned, this is what I'm reading, this is what's changed about me. And actually from that, you find a lot of other people who are connecting or adding or correcting what you're writing. And I find that kind of learning in the open and learning with peers and also learning through making have been very helpful modes to wrap my head around complex things.
Can you talk a little bit about, sort of, again, kind of community practices? And I didn't say this in your bio, but you come obviously from Creative Commons before Mozilla. And so whether there are ways of being in community that you've seen have been very successful and that you, again, have worked inside of or been close to, as we're in week 3 of a 4-week process, and then afterwards, how people sort of move forward with the mini community we've created is something I think a lot about. But how do you think about it in the context that you've created and through work?
I guess these are always processes of becoming, right? Processes of learning that, and I think that's one of the nice things about learning with community is that you can also this realization of like, one of the cheesy metaphors we used was a caravan that, we might be all generally, we're all going places, but we have these moments in time where we're maybe meeting and sitting around a fire, exchanging goods and ideas. And then we might be going together for the next bit to the next stop or even further. But there's this kind of, I think, really enriching way of seeing this kind of learning where we're not maybe always going to be all the time in this configuration, but we're in this kind of, crazy caravan together, or at least this is a stop along the way. And I think the other thing that's helped, at least from kind of the free and open movement, although it of course has its issues, was how are you making something so that it can be used by others? I think is really a challenge, because often it's definitely easier to make something like for yourself, but when you have to think about, okay, it's for me, but also could this be used by someone else and adapted and remixed and contextualized, then it becomes a different challenge. And so I think that there's some really nice ways of looking at that from like the free culture movement, this kind of making for reuse and for remix. Yeah.
A lot of what you're saying also crosses into talks we've had over the past 2 weeks and some of what we've discussed today as well. I want to open up for questions to Michelle from everyone here. This is our last speaker, so last opportunity to pipe up with some fundamental either challenges or really take advantage of Michelle's expertise. Emma.
Hi, Michelle, that was brilliant. And I've just started hearing about Solarpunk. Didn't know a huge amount about it, so I'm totally going to go off and explore that. But we do a lot of work with communities and do it playfully and imaginative processes. And I've often thought science fiction was actually a kind of way in which people could have those more, also step through a portal into a conversation around, because it's a convention and a genre they understand generally.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of wondered if you've come across really good participatory processes with the public, which look at that science fiction, future imagining stuff done playfully that I could look into.
Yeah, I love that question. And also, yeah, the idea that science fiction is a portal for sure. I would recommend the work of Adrienne Marie Brown. She comes from Detroit and the Allied media scene, and she really uses science fiction as a facilitation technique, and also looking at these issues of like community justice. And she writes really well about it, so I could recommend her. And the other one I was going to say was I wasn't able to attend it, but I followed along Twitter. It just happened like a few days ago in the UK, called Imagination Infrastructure. And that seemed also like a really nice conversation with about kind of, privilege and imagination, and then challenging that, and then ways of using imagination like in new configurations. And so that seemed just like an amazing program. I will try to find that as well.
Yeah, I think it was a clash
Don't
with
worry,
our
I got
program actually. So we prioritised probably being on this.
Yeah,
I'm waiting
crossover.
waiting for that to be published as a video. I think it's like a sort of all afternoon thing. So
yeah.
Thank you.
Any questions for Michelle? I'm going to start putting people on the spot, especially those who are meeting face to face there and getting away with murder. Julie.
Yeah, I have a question about the sustainable internet, and looking at the earlier in your slides, it said about getting away from big tech. And I wondered what your thoughts are about how we can sort of, looking at the back end of the internet, if you like, how we can think about that as a decentralized thing, or is it going to be energy reliant? Have you got any kind of ideas about how to get away from big tech and remain connected?
Yeah, this is an awesome question. I mean, I have only the weirdest, smallest crumbs of how we could even do that. But I think it's definitely, this kind of divestment from big tech is totally necessary for also the political, environmental, social reasons we talked about. And I think some places where I kind of find hope in that, there's this kind of decentralized web community, the D-Web community. I think from kind of a technical perspective, they're doing really interesting things, less the crypto people, but more the, there's like a group called Secure Scuttlebutt, and they kind of talk about like, how are we creating, these decentralized networks? And a lot of them are also into decentralized, locally based ways of hosting that infrastructure as well. And who else I was going to recommend? I mean, I think these projects like the Solar Protocol is also quite cool to say, what does it mean to have a stewardship of internet infrastructure? And so, and where are we okay having trade-offs? Like maybe I don't need the world's, like, I don't need all of my internet services to be at this like incredible state-of-the-art performance. Like there's a lot of things I do online that don't need that level. And so that could be maybe where some of these kind of community stewarded networks are a place of inspiration. And yeah, what I mean, I guess I'm kind of interested in like, obviously like the free and open responses to the big tech, but they usually run into issues around like usability, scalability, and that's why we need design to help with some of those things, right? Like those are many of the people often doing that stuff don't necessarily have a design practice or even, so that's a place maybe where possibilities can thrive.
Can I get you to further a point that I think Julie is also interested in, which is the role of, your political and philosophical take on the role of convenience in this entire conversation about change and about climate change. Is convenience convenience seems to be the constant driver of any kind of innovation. Do you see a place for inconvenience?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess there's this, like, everyone talked about frictionless interactions, and then there's all these people being like, well, what if we put friction back in? And I do think there's places of friction that are welcomed, and but I guess that's why you need something like a design justice practice. So it's not like, we don't have like a paternalistic way of assuming we know where and how people want to be inconvenienced, but how are we doing genuine participatory practices that help people, help negotiate that, right? Yeah, because what I might think of just as frivolous convenience might actually be someone's like medical life or death. So there's this kinds of things where I think what seems to be happening in the design world, this kind of questioning of the authority of design and designers is really nice to then look at how do we see convenience or critiques of convenience in a more dynamic or contextual way. But that's just me riffing. I'm sure you all have also thought a lot about these or have responses to some of those ideas.
I think we've been ping-ponging some of these issues. I'm going to transform a kind of question from Priya just as a final question, which is, if you had to look at the political landscape today, globally, and I know that this is an area that is of great interest to you, what are some of the policymakers and what are some of the leading countries that are coming in and really sort of challenging these big 10 companies that you showed us at the beginning?
Yeah. I mean, the EU, I'm sorry, UK, but the EU is still leading some of that in terms of like some pretty ambitious, like there's quite a few members of European Parliament who've said like, we want to make things like carbon neutral data centers a thing, like so there's some policies in that spaces. I was reading a good analysis of like, we need different tactics. So this idea of like the Saudi Arma code keeps coming up. So like regimes that are run by democracy, you need this one set of tactics, and regimes that are run by non-democratic things need other tactics. And so I think that might be helpful to distinguish. It's like in democratic regimes, I think like at the EU level, there's some pretty cool stuff happening. They're in the twin transition, they're trying to link sustainability and digitization. And there's like, particularly with the Greens, they're trying to do that in a, you know, in the ways that we've been talking about. What other countries are doing good stuff? I think actually, I would say probably the place to look is at the city level, now that I think about it, rather than country. Barcelona, Amsterdam, New York, they're part of this like Helsinki, this kind of cities for digital rights, who are also really progressive in terms of their internet infrastructure and connecting to like these digital rights issues. And so I think I'll also try to find the link for you all, but like maybe looking at cities as a place of change is, I think, probably where we're going to see a lot of stuff happen as well.
And I'm going to finish with Carl. You get to ask the last question, Carl.
Yeah, it was just in relation to the kind of organizational company culture at Mozilla. It was quite an open question, but then especially in relation to this kind of climate low carbon space and how it's perceived or talked about, and maybe how that compares to other organizations you've been part of.
Yeah, it's new. And so we're all it's like, the nice thing is we made this kind of like peer learning group, like amongst coworkers. We started a sustainability program based on employee pressure. We were all like a bunch of employees being like, why the hell aren't we talking about the climate crisis? And what, you know, and so that put pressure on the executives to start a sustainability program. So I would actually, that was also something that the Climate Action Tech group was a kind of nice support for. And then now that, I mean, a lot of the people, I think you might find this also in other places, is like, there's a lot of individuals who are like, I care, I want to make change, and how do I connect that to my like daily work? And so I think that's where we're at right now, is this kind of challenge between, okay, there's some organizational commitments, and now they're getting translated somewhat into people's work, but there's more individual pressure, I think, and more individual desire to connect that stuff. And right now, I don't think it's, I mean, I would say there's pockets of people really wanting to make that happen, and who are thinking about it in a kind of, I don't know, deeper, richer way. But it's good. It's good to get a climate commitment, because once you have a commitment, you can always ratchet it up. So I don't know if you're in organizations or can influence organizations to make public commitments, and then you can, that's a good hook to pressure them to do more, do faster.
Michelle, I want to thank you for taking the time today. I think it's such a gentle and generous sort of contribution that you've given us to finish a day that was very intense and full of thoughts, and you've just enabled us, I think, to close that in a really gentle way. So a big digital round of applause from everyone, just from around really the world, contributing today to their to their day. And I just want to make sure that everyone gets to pick up their children. Thank you so much. And thank you, residents. I'm happy to stick around if people want to keep chatting. Otherwise, for those of you at the Barbican, enjoy your afternoon. Yes, thank you again.
Thank you all. It was such a